Okay. Well, listen, good morning. God bless you guys, and welcome to our Sunday school. We're going to have about 30 to 35 minutes. At 40 minutes, this program will cut off automatically, I believe. If you have any questions, this is a method that we can be interactive, so just kind of raise your hand, or there's actually a way you could send a message, and it'll alert me that you would like to ask a question, and we'll try to get those questions in. Just remember, our classes are normally 1 hour, and we're going to try to squeeze everything down through about a half hour. We've been studying the life of Christ in our Sunday school, and we've been looking at Christ's synoptic gospel, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and how they have a very similar view. Today, we're going to kind of break from that limitation. We're going to actually go to the book of John for a little bit, because we want the full perspective of this time period. As you guys know, we're very close to Easter, and we're beginning this morning our series on Easter. And we're just 2 weeks away from Palm Sunday, 3 weeks away from Resurrection Sunday, and it's a special season. So we're going to begin with a little background and what happens right before that, what's known as the Holy Week. So we're going to look at the last 6 months of Jesus' ministry and what's really the focus there, because it's all headed towards the cross. As many of you know, Jesus' ministry was mostly in Galilee, and he spent most of his time in this town. Galilee included several towns, Capernaum being probably the most famous one, the one he spent most of his ministry in. But there were several towns, Chorazin, Bethsaida. These are towns that are part of Galilee. The people in Galilee were very friendly. They were very down to earth. They weren't like the people in Jerusalem. The people in Jerusalem were kind of stuck up and very religious, and they thought themselves better than everyone else. But out there in Galilee, it was a very comfortable atmosphere, and people were friendly, but they were set in their ways. And Jesus actually didn't have a lot of success in Galilee. As friendly as they were unrepentant. And many of us have heard how Jesus addresses these towns right at the end of his ministry in Galilee. He rebuked them. It says, then he began to rebuke the cities in which most of his mighty works had been done. That's where Jesus did most of his miracles, most of his teachings, most of his interaction with people, Galilee. But he says, woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida, for if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago. They were an unrepented city after approximately 2 years of Jesus ministering there. And then Jesus turns his focus from Galilee. He goes into the region of Judea, and Judea includes Jerusalem and Bethany, where his friend Lazarus lived. And he goes to also Perea. He spends a lot of time there. If you look at this map, up at the top, there's the Sea of Galilee, where that little blue dot is in the middle of the map. And that's where he spent most of his ministry. Up there, you'll see Chorazin, Bethsaida, Capernaum. Yeah, and those cities were difficult. But then Jesus begins to make his way down south. He goes through Samaria. He goes down to Jerusalem, which is in Judea. And then he goes up, back north, and he goes to by the river Jordan, which is that squiggly line between the two seas, the Sea of Galilee and the Salt Sea. And he goes over to the right to the region of Perea. This is where Jesus spends the last 6 months of his ministry. Okay, and his ministry in Galilee is behind him. His ministry as a whole is coming to an end. Jesus is on this journey, as you saw in the map, from the north going down to the south. and his life is almost over. So where does it begin? All right, I want to look at the different gospel writers, but let's look at Luke chapter 9, verses 51 and 52. Bible says here, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And it reads this way. Now it came to pass when the time had come for him to be received up. See, that's the focus, for him to be received up. In other words, it's finished. That he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem and sent messengers before his face. And as they went, they entered a village of the Samaritans, right? That's one of the first stops, Samaria, which was in between, to prepare for him. Okay? So, here we see his purpose is irrevocable. His direction is set. And he who said, I have come to do your will, O God, right? That's found in Hebrews. Now he's focusing on the will he came to do. He's focusing on the cross. Everything is now leading to that final week. So Jesus' ministry in Galilee is behind him. His brief ministry, which is going to last for about 6 months in Samaria, Judea, and Perea, is before him. And just beyond that is the cross. Okay, and I already said these are Jesus' last months on earth. So let's take a look at the end of Jesus' ministry as recorded by the different gospel writers. And I told you we're going to go to John first. John records the beginning of the Judean Perean ministry in John chapter 7. Jesus went to Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles. And here in 7:14 and 15, it says, now about the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and taught. And the Jews marveled, saying, how does this man know letters? That's kind of offensive, right? Having never studied. This guy's not one of us. He's not from here. Actually, this is the first time towards the end of his ministry that Jesus is recorded as teaching in the temple. All this time, Jesus is teaching elsewhere. This is the first time that Jesus is teaching in the temple, and the people were like, who is this guy? And how does he know all these things? And how does he even know how to read? He didn't go to school with us. So a bit offensive, a bit shocking, but at the end of his ministry, Jesus is teaching. The last time he had done it that we know of was when he was 12 years old, and Jesus taught and he spoke with the leaders in the temple as a young 12-year-old, right? Okay, so let's jump ahead to John chapter 10, verses 22 and 23. This is another feast, and now it was the Feast of Dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter, just a few months later, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. All right, that's a section of the temple. So once again, Jesus finds himself in Jerusalem. And if we go a little further in John chapter 11, God bless you, Ralph. Nice seeing you. We have the account of Lazarus. And Jesus is now next to Jerusalem. He's in the city of Bethany. And actually, he had already visited Perea. And Jesus goes, and just to show his focus on the end of his ministry, this is when Lazarus dies. And Jesus allowed him to die. Jesus could have healed him. But anyway, John 10:40, and he went away again beyond the Jordan to the place where John was baptizing at first, and there he stayed. That's where he goes to Perea. But then in John chapter 11, Jesus resurrects Lazarus, and he says some words that many of us have heard, we're very familiar with, where Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, yet shall he live. Words that the disciples didn't understand. They didn't connect. Mary and Martha, who were waiting for Jesus to come and heal their brother, they didn't understand the power of these words. But Jesus, once again, he's trying to help us focus in on what's about to happen, the resurrection. And he says, I am the resurrection and the life. And he makes promises to us. but he's showing also he has power over death. Okay, he is the resurrection. Apparently, Jesus stayed in this region of Perea and Judea until the feast of Passover, the Passion Week, the last week of his life here on earth. We know that he arrives on a Sunday, which is known as Palm Sunday. And basically, going through the book of John, this is the gist of John's account of Jesus' ministry in Judea and Perea. I want to quickly go to the account in Mark. So let's jump to Mark chapter 10. Mark's account that leads up to the Passion Week is very brief, by the way. Mark covers everything in one chapter, chapter 10, and it starts with 10 verse 1. And he writes, "Then he arose from there and came to the region of Judea by the other side of the Jordan, and multitudes gathered to him again. And as he was accustomed, he taught again." Where did he go? Okay, he left Galilee. He arose from there. What's there? That was Capernaum. He left Capernaum. He left Galilee, goes to the region of Judea. And here's an outline of what Mark recorded about the last 6 months of Jesus' life, Jesus' ministry. This is an outline. This is what Mark actually talks about. First, Jesus is questioned by the Pharisees. Okay, they ask him a question about divorce, and they're trying to snag him. They're trying to catch him and trying to get him to say something that is going to cause the people to go into an uproar. Now, these last 6 months, Jesus is going from teaching to debates with the Pharisees. And being that he's closer to Jerusalem, he has more encounters with these Pharisees and the religious leaders and the members of the Sanhedrin. Everybody's coming at him. All right, so they question him. And then the next thing that Mark covers is Jesus blesses the little children. And we're familiar with some of these accounts. Then he goes, Jesus counsels the rich young ruler. All right. And number 4 that Mark covers regarding this period, Jesus predicts his death. And that's the 3rd time that Jesus actually gets the disciples. It's an important time because Jesus is really teaching a lot during this time. He really wants his disciples to be prepared for this time where he leaves them and they're going to carry on with the ministry. The next thing that's covered in the book of Mark in this section is a lesson on greatness in the kingdom of heaven. Those of you who were part of Salty, you remember the verse, "The greatest in the kingdom is the servant of all." All of that happened because 2 of the disciples, James and John, they approached Jesus. If you look at Mark's account, it's just them. But actually, when we look at Matthew's account, we realize the mother is there. James and John actually brought their mother to Jesus, and they wanted to secure the best seats in heaven. They wanted to make sure that one sat at the right, and I want the other one to sit on the left of you up in heaven. And Jesus is like, "I'm sorry, that's not for me to determine. That's for the Father to determine." And those 2 and their mother really upset the other 10 disciples. So Jesus takes advantage of this, and he begins to show them, you know who's going to be great in the kingdom of heaven? The greatest in the kingdom of heaven is the person who serves, the servant of all, right? So that's the next thing that Mark covered in this section that happened in the last 6 months. And then finally, there is a blind man known as Bartimaeus. We have his name. And he calls out to Jesus in Jericho as Jesus is going by. And blind Bartimaeus finds out it's Jesus, and he had heard about him. And he begins to cry out, "Son of David, have mercy on me, Son of David." And if Jesus was willing, you can make me whole. And Jesus says, "I am willing." And blind Bartimaeus receives his sight. So those are the 6 things that Mark kind of covers during this Judean Perean period. Okay, now let's look at how Matthew covers this period. All right, Matthew covers it in 2 chapters. Mark gives us 1, And Matthew's like, I could do a little bit better. And he says, I'm going to give you 2 chapters regarding this Judean Perean period, the last 6 months. Verse 19, verse 1 is where it starts. Now it came to pass when Jesus had finished these sayings that he departed from Galilee and came to the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. There he goes. He's leaving Galilee and he's entering this ministry. And I want to look at his list. Here's an outline of what Matthew records about Jesus' last 6 months. All right. Number 1, Jesus questioned by the Pharisees. Whoa, it sounds very familiar. Number 2, Jesus blesses the little children. He's following Mark's outline. As a matter of fact, he's copying a lot of what Mark wrote. We taught about the priority of Mark. Mark became the book that other writers, Matthew and Luke, kind of copied. Number 3, Jesus counsels the rich young ruler. Wow, that's the same. No, nothing different. But then now, Matthew is going to insert his own, something that he thinks Mark missed. And he writes about the parable of the workers in the vineyard. And this was, he spends a little time in that. He goes to Jesus predicts his death. Well, same thing that Mark wrote about. A lesson on greatness in the kingdom. But I told you Matthew puts his own twist on it. And this latent lesson on the greatness in the kingdom, this time it includes the mother, right? And it's like, are you kidding me? You guys brought your mom? The sons of thunder come to Jesus with mom? Okay. And then we have the story of Bartimaeus in the book of Mark. But in the book of Matthew, it's not just one blind man, it's 2 blind men that receive their sight. Mark focused on one and he gave us his name, and that was pretty cool. But how awesome, Matthew records it and says, wait a second, guys, I know that Mark wrote about one guy, but I want you to understand there were 2 blind men there on that road by Jericho, and both blind men received their sight. So very similar accounts. He takes 2 chapters to write about it. But they're both pretty similar, and they're both brief. Okay. Finally, the account of Luke, Luke's account is so different. Mark and Matthew were brief, but Luke concentrates on this period. In the book of Luke, this is the largest section in the Gospel of Luke. Luke covered a lot of things. Remember, Luke is a doctor and he loves giving details, right? Luke loves covering as much as possible. He does a lot of investigating. So he begins in chapter 9 and he goes all the way through the end or towards the end of chapter 19. This same period that the other 2 wrote about in 1 chapter and 2 chapters, he covers it in over 10 chapters. So obviously he has a lot to say. And given the time, we certainly can't cover everything that he touches. But I just want to point out some of the things that were unique in the Gospel of Luke. But I want you to understand the feel of it. Throughout these 10 plus chapters, we continuously get the impression that Jesus is at, or he is near, or he is moving towards Jerusalem. That seems to be the feel that he's expressing, that Luke is expressing. Hey guys, I want you to know that all of these teachings and everything he's doing is because he's heading towards Jerusalem. He's heading towards the cross. And as he's heading towards the cross, as he's heading towards Passover, this is what was happening. This is what he was doing. So that's the general feel of Luke's book. And he has a lot of unique material. The main theme in the book of Luke in this section is teaching his disciples, because they got to make sure they're ready. Jesus is making sure they're ready to continue, because the church is going to be built upon this rock, right? Upon these disciples, upon their leadership. So teaching is the main theme. Jesus appears to go from discussions with his disciples to debates with the religious leaders of Israel. And Luke records something that a lot of the other gospels didn't have too many of, but Luke records plenty of parables. And he also records several miracles. Up on the screen, I think you already have the material that's unique in the Gospel of Luke. Number one, Christ's journey along the border of Samaria and Galilee. Number two, there's the mission of the 72, where Jesus sent out the 72 and he gave them authority to preach and to cast out demons and to heal the sick, and he sends them out on that mission. The third thing that's unique here is the parable of the Good Samaritan. Wow, what a powerful parable that is known throughout the world, and yet we wouldn't have it if Luke didn't record it. Number four, Christ's visit with Mary and Martha in Bethany. And this is where Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus and Martha is in the kitchen, and she's worried about serving and preparing the food and making sure, the guests are treated right. And she's being a beautiful person. And she's frustrated because Mary's at the feet of Jesus, and she goes to Jesus and kind of complains. And she's like, hey, Jesus, can you say something to Mary so that, she can come and help me? And basically, in my own words, Jesus is saying, I'm sorry, but Mary has chosen what is best, right? Because what could be better than sitting at the feet of Jesus and getting teaching, words of life straight from the author of life. So Luke includes this visit with Mary and Martha in Bethany. Then there's Christ's teaching on persistence in prayer, the healing of the crippled woman on the Sabbath, and Christ having a dinner with a Pharisee and how he was treated, and he was welcomed by the Pharisee, but he really wasn't treated too nice by the Pharisee. He was welcomed into the home of the Pharisee, but his feet weren't washed, and he was kind of ignored and kind of kept to the side. Wow, why would you invite him then if you're going to treat him like this? But who records this? It's the Gospel of Luke. Okay, so these are unique perspectives, unique accounts that come from Luke that aren't in the other Gospels. Then what does he do next? Luke then copies the book of Mark, and everything that Mark said, all those other 6 points, he includes them also. So what's important here? Okay, there's a focus on the last 6 months of Jesus' ministry. There's a focus on his teaching to his disciples because he wanted to make sure that they were ready for ministry in his absence. They had a hard time ministering in his presence, with him nearby, with him as their backup. Jesus, we prayed and nothing happened. Can you fix it? But Jesus is preparing them to go without his physical presence. And so teaching was very important. In the same way, teaching has to be important for us. In the same way, I believe Jesus prepares us for ministry. How does he do that? He wants to make sure that he equips us. He's going to send us out also in our own way, but we have to spend time in his teachings. We have to spend time in his word. There's a focus on Christ's teachings for the disciples, but there has to be a focus on Christ's teachings for us. Jesus was in the face of opposition, but despite opposition, Jesus pressed on, and Jesus is showing his disciples, hey, listen, if they're doing this to the master, if they're doing this to me, right, the author, then don't be surprised when you guys have a difficult time also. It's all about this. This is coming to a culmination at the cross, and what happens at the cross is going to affect their lives in such a way. They're going to be scattered, we know. They're going to be lost. They're going to be confused. Despite all this preparation, but this preparation was so important because it's going to be begin to come back to their memories, and they're going to recall his teachings and how he prepared them, especially during these last 6 months. Jesus remained focused on his purpose. And here's the beautiful thing about those last 6 months. The Bible says that Jesus performed many miracles, so many people received healings and the power of his ministry, but many people believed in Jesus. So it was important for him to go to Samaria. It was important for him to go to Perea. It was important for him to go to Judea and Jerusalem because many people would believe. Even in the temple, people could not believe his teachings and the authority and the power with which he spoke. The Pharisees wanted to capture him and arrest him and take him and eventually kill him. But many times they couldn't because the people were so moved by the teachings of Jesus right there in the temple that nobody would dare to lay their hands on him. Nobody would dare. Even when they were sent, there was something about the way he taught. They said, nobody has taught like this man teaches. Important 6 months at the end of his ministry. Next week, we're going to begin to focus on, I know it's been very quiet, it's been very one-sided, and this is not what Sunday school is like, but is there anyone that has a question or wants to make a comment or contribute in any way? Just kind of wave your hand in front of the screen. Is that Genesis? Is that you?
Is that Genesis?
Go ahead and unmute yourselves if
Genesis, is that you?
No, God bless you guys though.
you were just stretching. All right. Well, listen, next week we're going to pick it up with the beginning of the Passion Week. And I know that next week's not Palm Sunday, it's the following. But we got a lot to cover, a lot of material. And so next week we're going to start with Passion Week Day 1. And we're going to probably get through what happens on Monday and what happens on Tuesday, maybe what happens on Wednesday. We're out of time. I have 29 minutes and I'm trying to cut it off at 30. Anyone with questions? Brenda's really insisting that questions. If not, I want to remind you that, okay, we have
Vashti, unmute yourself.
We have Vashti and we have Jose.
Wait, why are you ending at 10:30?
Oh, we were limited by Zoom. Zoom is 40 minutes, so it's going to cut off. It's a half-hour lesson with about 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. I don't want to take it to the last minute because we will get cut off. Jose.
All I wanted to say was just thank you for this because it's surprising with all the things that are going on that we can still go to Sunday school and we can still hear worship and the Word of God. So I appreciate this, and I think everybody else, at least here, does also. So thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Yes, it's important for us to have this kind of continuity. I know several of the other teachers are also having a similar setup where they're meeting with their classes. And so how powerful that God still allows us to assemble together in different places, still connect, and still have a study in His Word. At 11:30 today, there's going to be a Spanish service, and Kenny's going to do worship live from his home with his sons. That's going to be on FaceTime Live, Facebook Live. I'll get them right. That's going to be on Facebook Live. And if you want to hear the sermon in English, he's going to do that at 12:30. We encourage you to participate in at least one of those. Let's take time to worship together. Let's take time to pray together. We need to pray together. Let's take time to hear the Word. God bless you all. We love and appreciate you. I will see you next week. Actually, I'll be on this Friday. Take care. God bless you.